So this video will show you how to replace the wheel axles on your bike. So this here is a wheel axle, and basically what it is, it's a long threaded piece of rod, which is what goes through your wheels and what supports them. So this piece right on the end of here is one of the axles, and there's also an axle, of course, on your front wheel. So there's basically two reasons I can think of why you would want to replace one of your axles. And the first reason is what's happened to this bike, which is that the back axle on this bike broke yesterday when I was riding it. I had a somewhat heavy load on the back, and I hit a hard spot of pavement, and that impact just ended up causing, that axle to break. So we're going to take it apart shortly, and we're going to get to see that. And the other potential reason of why you might want to switch this axle is if you have the kind of axle this bike here has, which is the kind that has a nut on the end of either end of the axle, which is used for holding the wheel to the frame. You could switch that style of axle for the kind of axle that this bike has on both the front and back wheels, which is a quick release style of axle. So you see that black handle on the end there. What that does is you can just flip that down and it releases the wheel, and you can take off the wheel without needing a wrench. So there's advantages and disadvantages to both types of systems. This one's a little bit faster, but for a bike like this, which you're going to be locking up all the time, you don't really want someone to be able to quickly steal one of your wheels. So I think that this kind is better. So you might want to switch between the two different styles of axles depending on the sort of ways you're going to be using your bike. So it is actually possible to ride the bike when the axle's broken. As you can see, the wheel still, flops all over the place, but it still, stays intact and somewhat, it still rotates properly. It just, wobbles all over the place. You obviously don't want to ride it like that for too long, but if you're trying to, get somewhere by a certain time, there's a good chance you'll be able to make it like this. The only disadvantage is you might end up bending the frame a little bit where the axle attaches, so be careful of that. So we're going to start by taking the back wheel off here. So I've already started by flipping the bike upside down, and I'm going to shift into one of the low chain rings. I'm going to release the brakes, and then I'm going to loosen those nuts and bolts, and we're going to try taking the wheel off, and probably a whole bunch of pieces of ball bearings and stuff are going to go flying everywhere, so I'll try my best to capture as many of those as possible, so I might be able to reuse them again. So as you saw when I was taking it out, the axle just fell apart into two pieces like that. You can see it just sheared right off there, right at the edge of one of the cones, unfortunately. So I'm going to have to replace that. I'm going to try and find an axle that's the same length. I've got a few spares in my parts bin, so I'm going to see what I've got. So upon further inspection of the existing axle after it was ridden, you can see there's this big divot part here in the spacer there. And that was definitely caused from riding the bike, while the axle was broken. Something was rubbing up against there, so this spacer is, kind of worn. Of course, it's just a spacer, so it really doesn't matter. It's not like it's going to fail on me. It's just, just there for space, so I'm not worried about that. But this cone here, it has this flat spot right in that same spot, which corresponds to it. So obviously that was rubbing up against the inside of the hub or something. So that cone is no good anymore. I'll have to put a different cone on in its place. This side of the cone looks just fine. Wasn't damaged at all. Although you can see there's this little shiny spot on the threads where the threads were worn away. Again, just from rubbing up against part of the hub or something when the bike was being ridden with this axle, kind of sagging in the middle like this. And I just inspected the ball bearings inside there, and they look like they're in really good shape, despite the fact that I rode this with the broken axle, so that's pretty good. I should just be able to slap a new axle in there, and it should be as good as new. So I looked through my parts bin a little bit, and I tried to see if I could find an axle that was the same, and I couldn't find one that was quite as long. The one that was on the bike is the one that's at the bottom of the screen there, and the one above it's one that's just a little bit shorter, and I think it should be fine. The axle, when it was on the bike before, it had really long sections at the end. You can see all the threads that are sticking out at the end there, which is where the nut goes on, and I think it's more threads than you really need. On one side you might want lots of threads if you have a kickstand on your bike, or in my case I have a trailer hitch which goes on. But I think this top one should be fine. I'll just put it so that there's a little bit of space on the one side and a lot of space on the other side where the trailer hitch needs to go. So the replacement axle I'm going to use already has all sorts of hardware from the last bike it was being used on. It's not brand new, it's one that I was using on a different wheel, on a wheel that I actually ended up getting rid of, so I saved the axle. So I'm going to take all that old hardware off, and I'm going to use most of the hardware from the broken axle here. So now I've got my replacement axle all stripped down to the bone and ready to be reassembled with all the hardware from the existing one. We're going to use all of the existing hardware here, with the exception of that one cone there, which has the little flat spot on it, which was affected from when we were riding with a broken axle. So we're just going to, put all that other stuff onto that other axle there. Of course, you only put one side on. We'll put this side together first, and then we'll put it on the bike, or put it through the wheel, and then we're going to put this side together there. So to do this task, we're going to be using a cone wrench which fits on those cones, and an adjustable wrench. If you're unfamiliar with how to use those sorts of tools, and how to take off cones and lock rings and spacers, and how to set your cones up properly when you're reassembling, I recommend going and checking out my wheel bearing video, because that video gives a very thorough explanation of how to take apart your bearings and put them all back together. This video is just basically a simple run through showing the step-by-step of how to replace an axle. So I've got one side of the axle here built, and I used the existing piece from the other one, from the broken one, to judge how far in to put that cone there. If these axles were the same size, you'd want to line up these two ends here, and then put the cone in as far as the crack there, just because I knew that when it happened, I knew that it cracked right at the edge where that cone was. But since I know that this axle is a little bit shorter than the one it's replacing, I'm leaving a little bit of less space here at the end, because I won't have that space to utilize on this shorter axle. So now that this side has been built, we're going to insert it into the wheel. So now that we've got that inserted through there, we're going to put all of the hardware from this piece here onto that end there, including this little rubber boot which I ended up taking off, which is there just as a little bit of extra protection for those bearings, and that's what's kept them looking so clean through the winter. So now I've got the other side of the axle all assembled together. All the hardware is on there and it's in the right spot. It's very important that you get your cone locked in place using your lock nut, so it's locked very tightly, but also so that it's locked in the right spot, so that your bearing isn't either too tight or too loose. Again, this is something that's explained very thoroughly in my wheel bearing video, so go and check that out if you haven't taken a wheel bearing apart before. But now this is all ready to go, and I'm just going to put my dust cap on, and then we're going to be pretty much good to put it back on the bike again. So now the wheel goes back on just as it was before. So I got that all back together again. Now I just have to reconnect my brakes and my bike should be ready to go. And as you can see, even though the axle's a little bit shorter, there's still plenty of threads left to get this nut all the way on. I still have a few little threads here on the end showing. And it's the same over on this side here. There's no thread showing, but that nut is all the way on there, and I'm not worried about it at all. So that concludes my tutorial on replacing the wheel axle on a bicycle. I hope you found this video helpful. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Thanks for watching.